$9.99. Flame roast sirloin.
President Trump is targeting Democrats politically on immigration ahead of the midterm elections. Here's what he had to say during a Make America Great Again rally last night in Tennessee.
Chuck and Nancy, they don't want the wall. They want open borders. They're more interested in taking care of criminals than they are in taking care of you. The Democrats want to use it as a campaign issue. And I keep saying, I hope they do. The fact is, the Democrats are lousy politicians. They're lousy on policy.
Could this strategy help Republicans win in November? The Power Panel now. Former Hillary Clinton campaign staffer and former DNC advisor Zach Pecanis is here. And RNC spokeswoman Kayleigh McEnany. Kayleigh, I'm going to start with you. Is this a winning strategy for Republicans?
No doubt about it. You know, this is the message that won President Trump the 2016 election. It's the message that will win Republicans or have Republicans keep the House. You look at Suffolk County, Harris, not far from where you are out on Long Island. This area, John Kerry won it. Barack Obama won it twice. Al Gore won it. But President Trump carried Suffolk County by 8 points. Lee Zeldin beat an 8-term incumbent there. They won it by talking about illegal immigration because MS-13 has wreaked havoc on that community. This is a winning message, and it will drive Republicans to victory in November.
Zach, how do Democrats counter this?
Well, look, I mean, Kayleigh wants to talk about 2016, but let's talk about 2017 and 2018. We have two very specific races, Virginia, the Pennsylvania congressional race, where immigration played a very key role in that race. The Republican was relentless in attacking the Democrats on the issue of immigration, and Democrats won that race, not by a little bit, but by a lot. This issue does not have the political saliency with voters that Republicans think it does. And the reason is pretty clear. Immigration does not explain why people's prescription drug costs are going up after drug companies got a massive taxpayer giveaway in the Republican tax bill.
Kayleigh?
Zach, you know as well as I do how important the state of California is, how many congressional races are very competitive there. It could be the key to winning the House. California is seeing a rebellion of localities against the state. It's now a sanctuary state out there in California. We know that there are 10,000 MS-13 gang members in this country across 40 states. Illegal border crossings are tripling the efforts to get into our country compared to this time last year. This is a problem. Voters see it. The Harvard-Harris poll confirms that for us. 65% supported Trump's immigration plan. It's a winning issue. Democrats can't see it.
You know, Nancy Pelosi has inserted herself in all of this, talking about MS-13 gang members. What do you say about that, Zach?
Look, I think that this strategy is tried and true. It is trying to tell voters that MS-13 represents the entire Latino community, and voters aren't falling for it. You know, I mean, what they are actually
nobody falls for that because it's not true.
Well,
no one
I agree that it's not
everybody.
true, but that's why Republicans continue to bring up MS-13. They're trying to smear an entire racial minority with individual violent criminals. But it's just not going to work because people are seeing their gas prices go up, and they're wondering why oil companies are hiking up their gas prices after they got a massive taxpayer giveaway in the Republican tax bill. Immigration doesn't explain that fact, but Republicans are trying to make it explain that fact, and they can't, and they're losing because of it.
So, Kayleigh, Zach wouldn't touch Representative Nancy Pelosi. What would you say?
Yeah, Zach, you couldn't be further from the truth trying to demonize Republicans. This country is the most generous on earth. We welcome 1.1 million legal immigrants each year, more than any other country in the world. What we stand against is illegal immigration, and what we stand against are the small cohort within that are, in fact, MS-13 gang members. And if you think you're going to win an election by saying MS-13 that dismembers bodies has a spark of divinity, in Nancy Pelosi's words, if you think that'll win an election, by all means try. We will welcome that messaging.
You can't name a single race this in 2018 or 2017 that you have won based on the issue of immigration. And the reason is because people are seeing through your race-baiting tactics to distract us from the main issues about why people's premiums are going up. why people's gas prices are going up, why people's prescription drugs are going up. Immigration does not answer any of those questions.
Right, you've said
That's
that
what this election is going to be about.
I want to give Kaylee the last word on this issue.
Zach, you might have missed the 4 special elections that we won in 2017. We did win them. Immigration was discussed, and we will win. We will win again in 2018.
All right. We have more to talk
in
about.
San Francisco,
so I want you guys to sit tight during the commercial. We are now learning the plane carrying a top North Korean official is landing right now in New York City. I'm looking out of the corner of my eye on the big wall because I'm seeing a lot of activity near the security entrance that we've been watching all day. He is set to meet with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo as they work towards setting up a summit between President Trump and the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. We're watching this picture closely. As we get fresh pics of him on the ground landing, we'll bring them to you. Stay close.
The president at the top of the hour before he heads to New York to meet with a top North Korean official. And a troubling case we've been telling you about on the show. Growing bipartisan calls for the president to commute the sentence of Matthew Charles. Who is he, and why is a reality TV star even involved? That story and more on the Daily Briefing.
Breaking news. North Korea's former spy chief has landed on the ground in New York City. He's expected now to meet with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo as the two parties work toward a much anticipated summit between President Trump and North Korea's dictator. He's on the ground. He's here. And let's bring back now our power panel, Zach Buchanan and Kaylee McEnany. I want to start with the picture, which is outside of Customs at JFK. And we understand meeting the plane where the North Korean top official is there is a black car. So we're waiting for that. As that happens, if there's something to show you live, we'll take you there. But in the meantime, I want to just get your quick thoughts now as the summit goes forth, at least for now. Kaylee?
This is extraordinary. You know, for 27 years, presidents have tried and failed on North Korea. But President Trump, in just 18 months, has done quite a bit. You look at the securing the release of 3 hostages, the fact that we're on the precipice of a meeting and North Korea is not demanding that we lift the sanctions. They're uttering the word denuclearization, the destruction of that nuclear test site. It's extraordinary what this president has done. And Mike Pompeo is included in that, the Secretary of State. Last time he met with the North Koreans, we saw hostages be set free. So what's going to come of this, we'll see.
You know, Zach, you and I have talked about this, and you have reminded me that, you know, not all Democrats see this the same way. Why are there some who won't give this president credit? I had guests on earlier who absolutely do give him credit for this.
Look, I mean, I think it's absolutely great that we're trying diplomacy. Diplomacy is a lot better than going to war. But one of the things, I mean, the Kim regime has been asking for a meeting for years now, so accepting it one time is not an achievement. What would be an achievement is verifiable, complete, irreversible denuclearization. Not mentioning the word denuclearization, but agreeing to actually dismantle the nuclear program, to agreeing to a verification regime that goes on long after the summit ends. That has not been achieved yet. And we have seen in the past the North Korean regime agree to things like blow up facilities for the cameras. They have agreed to meet on a lower level before. And so if at the end of this agreement there is not verifiable, irreversible reductions of nuclear weapons to the level of 0 forever, this is not a successful summit.
So what the president has said is that, you know, it may be more incremental. And that's just about the dismantling. What other political experts are saying that for the president politically, what this does is it sets up a conversation now with the regime that has wanted a conversation, as you point out, Zach, but has to put some stuff on the table now. That has not happened. Kaylee?
Right, and I think we will see them put stuff on the table. You know, we already saw the release of those hostages, but what's clear is we finally have a president who means action. He's a tough negotiator. He's not going to allow North Korea to come in and step on the United States. He's going to demand true denuclearization. This is not the Obama model of strategic patience. This is maximum pressure. This is not going to be a deal where, like we saw with Obama and Iran, $400 million of cash are given, and yet no hostages are released, and there are no security and assurances is that Iran will be free from nuclear weapons. This is the exact opposite side of the coin, and it will work because we have a president, President Trump, who is the great negotiator.
You know, the president is want to say, and his supporters and team members and White House staffers say that this is promises made, promises kept in motion as he pulls toward the summit if it happens. Zach, what is the Democrat counterpart to that other than just supporting it, which might not be a bad idea?
The Democrat counterpart is we are very excited to see the deal maker in action. They have set very high standards for what this deal needs to look like. Both Trump, Bolton, and Pompeo have said that there needs to be complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization down to zero, and a verification regime that goes into perpetuity. That is a standard that they have set. He is the deal maker. He needs to come away from this summit with that deal. Otherwise, it's just going to be another weak deal.
Is it a bust if they have more conversations, though? Perhaps it's just the beginning. I have to let you guys go. There's breaking news. The North Korean dictator. We got our first glimpse outside Terminal 1 and the tarmac where we believe the North Korean top official who's here to meet with the Secretary of State is now on his way, landed at JFK. Thanks for watching.
Fox News alert, President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meeting this hour at the White House as a top North Korean official arrives in New York for talks with Pompeo. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. The vice chairman of North Korea's Central Committee has just landed at Kennedy Airport. He'll be joining Secretary Pompeo later today in New York after Pompeo consults with President Trump. We have Fox team coverage. Jennifer Griffin is at the Pentagon on the CIA finding North Korea has no intention of giving up its nuclear weapons anytime soon. But first, we begin with John Roberts live at the White House. John.
Good afternoon to you, Dana. The president meeting this hour with his Secretary of State to go over some final strategy before Secretary Pompeo heads up to New York for meetings with Kim Yong-chol, who you pointed out has just landed in New York. Whether or not this summit goes ahead on June the 12th could well hinge on how those meetings go. They're clearly going to see if they're enough on the same page that they can have the two leaders sit down with each other and try to forge an agreement going forward. Kim Yong-chol is someone who Secretary Pompeo has gotten to know over recent weeks, already meeting with him twice. Here's the State Department spokeswoman, Heather Nauert.
This will be the Secretary's third meeting with Kim Yong-chol. They've had obviously very deep conversations where they've talked about a lot of detail about what the United States expectations are. I think it's important that we're going up to New York. I know the Secretary looks forward to engaging him in New York.
The White House is proceeding as if the summit is a go for June 12th. They have two teams in the East Asia region looking at one there. One of the teams is a logistics team headed up by the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, Joe Hagan, to figure out, what rooms you'll go to, who will meet with who, where, when, that sort of thing. They also have another team in the demilitarized zone to meet with North Korean officials to put together the diplomatic piece of this. The president last night in Nashville, not mentioning North Korea at all, but he did bring up his national security advisor, John Bolton. A lot of this went off the rails after John Bolton said on Fox News Sunday on the morning of April the 29th that he could see the Libyan model for denuclearization being applied to North Korea. North Korea kind of freaked out about all of that, and that's when the saber rattling started. The president last night in his rally in Nashville, though, with high praise for his national security advisor. Listen here.
Where's John Bolton? Great John Bolton. They think he's so nasty and so tough that I have to hold him back, okay? It's pretty great. And he's doing a great job. You better get some rest because we have some pretty good negotiations coming up.
Some pretty good negotiations coming. And yesterday on board Air Force One on the way to that rally in Nashville, Tennessee, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary, sounding an optimistic note, saying the president's letter specifically said that we were open to the meeting at the time. Again, we expect it to take place. We'll see what happens. We're going to be prepared. And if it takes place on June the 12th, we'll certainly be prepared. If for some reason it takes place at a later date, we are prepared for that as well. I'm getting the sense from the White House, because everybody's waiting, Dana, for an announcement. Oh, the summit's back on. I'm getting a sense from talking to some folks here at the White House that there may not be an official announcement that the summit is back on, because God forbid something happens and they have to cancel it again.
Right.
I think they may proceed just with the planning and then get on the plane and leave without ever saying that the summit's officially on.
Keep your bags packed, and I know you've had a lot of rain down there in Washington, D.C., which must mean that the lawnmowers need to get out there on the north lawn, so we appreciate you powering through that. Thanks, John.
The grass is growing. Typically, they mow it on Tuesday.
All right, meanwhile, a CIA analysis reportedly finding that it's unlikely North Korea will actually denuclearize. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live from the Pentagon. Jennifer, does the Pentagon think that the talks with North Korea will actually bear fruit?
Well, Dana, Defense Secretary Mattis, en route to an Asian defense ministers meeting in Singapore, said on board the flight to Hawaii that he is in close touch with the president and Secretary of State Pompeo about North Korea, which he said remains a diplomatically led effort. No response to that report from the CIA. But it is notable that at a stop at U.S. Pacific Command in Hawaii, he met with his Japanese counterpart in a sign of just how quickly things are moving and how potentially concerned Japan as an ally is about having its concerns reflected in any potential deal cut by the U.S. president. Japan's prime minister is slated to meet President Trump at the White House a week before the proposed summit with Kim Jong-un. Mattis is in Hawaii for the change of command ceremony for the head of U.S. Pacific Command, Admiral Harry Harris, whose aggressive posture toward China and military background is one reason President Trump has chosen him to be his next ambassador to South Korea. That ceremony begins in an hour out in Hawaii. Dana.
Jennifer, what is General Mattis's message to China during this trip?
Well, it's notable that Mattis referred to the region as the Indo-Pacific repeatedly during his gaggle on the flight. That is likely to annoy China, which sees India as a rival in Asia. Mattis said the U.S. would continue to conduct freedom of navigation operations, sending those U.S. naval vessels close to the disputed and man-made islands that China is militarizing in the South China Sea.
There had been a promise in 2015 by the President Xi in the Rose Garden, the White House meeting, where he stated they would not be militarizing the Spratly Islands. We have seen in the last month they have done exactly that, moving weaponry in that was never there before.
Earlier this month, China grabbed the Pentagon's attention, landing 2 nuclear-capable bombers on Woody Island, which is claimed by Taiwan and Vietnam. It carried out its first night landing on its only operational aircraft carrier late last week. This is something the U.S. Navy has been doing for decades, but shows how China's military is advancing. For context, Dana, the U.S. has 11 of these aircraft carriers. China has only 1. Dana?
I'm sure they're trying to build some more. All right, Jennifer, thank you so much. For more on this, retired Lieutenant General William Boykin, he's former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence under Bush 43 and Executive Vice President of the Family Research Council. It's great to have you here, General. Let me ask you,
thank you.
because there's so many moving parts in this region. We were just talking about China. Of course, we know that the South Koreans are very keen to get this done. Japan, anxious and coming to see the president next Tuesday in advance of the summit. And then you've got what's going on in the South China Sea and India. From your perspective as laymen, viewers like me watching all of this, what are you looking at to determine what's the most important thing to be focused on?
Well, first of all, I think we have to focus on China. I think China's a key player in this whole thing, and I think that China has tremendous influence over Kim. I also agree with the CIA assessment that it is unlikely that Kim has made a decision to give up his nuclear program. I think what's going to be important here is that we come out of this with some general, broad framework for a denuclearization. And I don't think that that is something that is going to happen in just a matter of a few hours of negotiations. I think this is going to be an iterative process, and we'll see more meetings in the future to try and work out a real agreement.
Yes, Brett Baer and I were talking yesterday on this program that we can't all expect that on June 12th everything will be magically solved. It might just be a chance to figure out where everybody is and to stake out those positions. You mentioned that CIA report. I have a piece of it here, NBC News reporting this, that the CIA has found Kim doesn't plan on giving up nukes anytime soon. He may open a Western hamburger franchise in Pyongyang and may offer other limited American investment, and there are no initial demands from the regime for U.S. troops to withdraw from South Korea. That all might be true, but also isn't it the case, General, that we just have such little information and insight into North Korea? We might have a lot more given the last 6 months and this interaction, the interaction that the administration is having with North Korea, including just today. We expect Secretary Pompeo will be meeting with the North Korean official here in New York City.
Yeah. Look, North Korea is a black hole. It's very difficult for our intelligence community to do the collection that they would do in other parts of the world. While we may have signals intelligence and photographic intelligence, the key thing that we need in there is human intelligence to know not only where things are and what the real capabilities are, but to know the intentions of the North Korean leadership. And that's a very difficult proposition. I think that Donald Trump has played his hand very, very well in terms of getting us to this point. Just sitting down and having a discussion face-to-face directly between our president and their premier, I think is a major step forward. But as we just said, don't expect this to mean that we're going to come out with some denuclearization agreement after one session.
Well, we've talked a little bit about China with you today. I agree that the threat from China on all different points are very strong, from the tariffs that the president just announced yesterday, that we're looking at an additional $50 billion in tariffs, the Chinese being very frustrated with that, saying that's not what you said just a month ago. And then this, I wanted to get your take on it. Apparently, China has conducted about 200 lab tests over a span of 3 years, starting in September of 2014. The U.S. carrying out a total of 50 over a 5-year span starting in 2012. And these kind of tests are basically in a nuclear program that simulate what it would be like to have a nuclear blast. Now, what does that tell you about China's intentions here? We might deal with a North Korean issue and then possibly have a Chinese one?
Yeah, you know, you could say that that is bluster. You could say that it's the Chinese trying to send us a message. If it were not for the fact that they are militarizing in powerful ways. You talked about their new aircraft carrier. Well, one thing everybody needs to understand is an aircraft carrier makes them an expeditionary force. It's no longer about defending the homeland. It's no longer about defending the South China Sea. It makes them an expeditionary force. They can project power to other parts of the world. And by the way, this is the largest, most sophisticated aircraft carrier in the world, probably. But it's going to take them a long time to learn how to actually operate that.
Well, there's a lot to pick on here. There's so much, and we appreciate your attention to all these details, and we'll be checking back in with you. Lieutenant General William Boykin, thank you.
Thank you.
So Republicans flooding the airwaves ahead of the California primary next week. How are they hoping to gain an edge in a state that could decide the balance of power? Plus, President Trump on the campaign trail pushing the GOP platform on immigration. Will it connect with voters? We're going to cover both topics with Amy Walter from the Cook Political Report up next.
So Democrats have opposed every common sense measure necessary to stop this horrendous scourge of crime, to dismantle MS-13, and to stop illegal immigration.
President Trump appearing at a rally in Nashville last night to support Senate candidate Marsha Blackburn. The president largely skipping talk of the economy and GOP tax cuts. Instead, he spent the bulk of his speech hammering Democrats on immigration.
Washington Democrats voted against legislation to remove these criminal aliens. They voted against case law, and they voted in favor of sanctuary cities that protect criminals. And they voted in favor of catch and release.
Amy Walter is the national editor for Cook Political Report, and you should all follow her because she's super smart. I want to ask you something, because the economy is super strong. American sentiment and feeling about the economy is enthusiastic, optimistic, and yet the tax cuts are not really what the president is out there touting. It's more immigration. Is that because that's what the polls are telling them is going to help win?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And look, the economy has been doing pretty well for quite some time. I mean, look, the stock market all through 2017 was basically on fire. And yet we haven't seen the gains in the economy translate directly to the president's overall approval rating. Even while people say they approve of the job that he's doing on the economy, they're more positive about that. They don't have a positive view necessarily of how he's doing as president. So I think that the issue of the economy, while it's important, is not the sort of thing that is getting the base as excited or as ginned up as immigration. And the tax bill, while it is more popular than it was when it first passed, still does not have the kind of resonance that Republicans were hoping it would, even among Republicans.
I guess the other thing is that issue was solved. The immigration issue is still on the table to be solved. USA Today did an analysis of party messaging in House races showing that for Democrats, and I'm not surprised by this, 53% of the Democrats' ads focused on health care and 43% are anti-Trump. And then for Republicans, 36% of the ads are really just focused on the president and supporting him, and 34% are on immigration. You know, a lot of presidents try to make the case that the midterm is not a referendum on them, that it's all about the Congress, and not the case this year. And that might actually be one of the reasons that the Republicans have a little bit more hope than they did a month or so ago.
It's absolutely a referendum on the president, even when the president says, or members of Congress say it's not a referendum. You always know that. So when the president's popular, his party tends to do better. When he's unpopular, he doesn't. But I think that was a really important finding. The first is, you're right, it's not surprising. Democrats, the number one issue among Democrats, you see this in all the polling, health care. Number one issue for Republicans, immigration. Makes sense in primaries that those two issues dominate. But the point about the pro and the anti-Trump ads is really interesting. I looked at the data, too, going back and comparing it to where Democrats were back in their midterm elections and how often they were talking about Obama. They weren't tying themselves to the president in Democratic primaries the way that Republicans are tying themselves to the president in Republican primaries. So it's a very sort of different environment. And as you saw, there are more Republicans that are embracing Trump than there are Democrats that are running, outwardly saying, I'm running against him or I want to impeach him.
So interesting. Now, so in less than a week, we might have a little bit more information as to whether the Republicans can hold the House. That's because California will hold its primary. And there's 3 districts, the 39th, 48th, and 49th, that the NRCC, the National Republican Campaign Committee, is running to target Trump voters. And in fact, they have all of these ads that are going to run on Facebook, Google, and Pandora. They're going to get text messages on Election Day. They're going to target Korean and Mandarin-speaking voters. Why is it so important for the Republicans to try to hold on to these races?
Yeah, great question. There are a number of Republican-held seats in California that Democrats are already investing in, want to play in. On a good night for Democrats, they win 3 to 4 of these seats. On a great night, they win 5 to 6 of these seats in California. That would mean that a quarter of the seats that they need to get to 23 could come just from California. So they need to keep California in play. The challenge is this top 2 primary system where the top 2 vote getters, regardless of party, move on to November. The good news for Democrats, they got a lot of candidates who are so excited and want to run. The bad news, they have a lot of candidates who are so excited and want to run. And in some cases, too many of them, they split the vote enough that the top 2 vote getters end up being Republicans in November. And Democrats are literally off the ballot. They
and
have
the
no
Democrats
chance.
are having to spend about, as I just talked to somebody, about $9 million to try to stave off these challenges. And they also say that early voting is quite enthusiastic for Democrats, which might indicate something good, or it could indicate that because they had so many Democrats running, they are splitting that vote, and that's why the Democrats are really worried. One last thing, a quick comment, if you could. Independents, registered independents, now are in a larger number than Republicans in California. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're moving to be Democrat voters or that they have a certain preference, but what does it signify to you?
It signifies to me a move that we've been seeing across the country, which is voters now define themselves less by party, even though they are more partisan than ever. So they don't like to say whether they're Democrat or Republican, but they end up voting almost unanimously for one party or the other.
But they might say that they're liberal or conservative. Correct. That might be a label they
You can be
prefer.
an independent and be a conservative Democrat. You can be an independent and be a conservative Republican. I don't think it says as much about your ideology as it says about your views of the 2 parties.
Interesting. All right, Amy Walter, what a treat to have you on. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
So a governor in a key Midwestern state set to step down amid personal and political scandals. We'll tell you who will take over in that state. Plus, Kim Kardashian set to meet with President Trump this afternoon. What's that all about? We'll explain. Fallout now from from the resignation of Missouri Governor Eric Greitens, who officially steps down on Friday in the wake of mounting allegations of sexual misconduct and campaign finance violations. He had been a rising political star who even had aspirations of becoming president. Matt Finn is following this story live from our Midwest Bureau in Chicago. Matt.
Dana, during Governor Greitens' short time in office, he was charged with 2 felonies. And today, the St. Louis Circuit Attorney announced she's dropping one of those charges, the felony computer tampering, saying even if Greitens was convicted, he likely would not be sent to jail. Regarding that felony computer tampering charge, Greitens was accused of electronically accessing a personal charity donor list and using it for political purposes. Now, the other felony charge against Greitens, invasion of privacy. He's accused of taking a photo of his mistress and threatening to blackmail her with it. 2 weeks ago, that case made it all the way to the jury selection process, and there was even a start date for the trial. But the alleged photo at the center of that charge never materialized, and the state suddenly dropped its case. A special prosecutor has been assigned to that case, and it's possible they might refile charges, but unless that mysterious photo ever surfaces, it seems like prosecutors will have a tough time pursuing Greitens. Dana.
Matt, what are the political implications of the governor's resignation? I know people have been wondering if this happened, what's the next step?
Well, you know, there was serious concern that Greitens' mounting scandal and legal trouble would have tarnished Republican odds in the state Senate race, where Republican State Attorney General Josh Hawley is running to unseat Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill. Hawley's office actually led the investigation into one of Greitens' charges, and Hawley demanded Greitens resign. So now Greitens' resignation is almost certainly a burden lifted off of Hawley's shoulders. And it was also possible impeachment hearings for Governor Greitens would have coincided with the midterms, so a big relief for Republicans in Missouri. And on another front, Missouri's new governor, Lieutenant Governor Mike Parson, will take office on Friday. And as of right now, it seems he is generally being welcomed by both parties in Missouri, described as having long relationships with legislative leaders and a reputation as a deal maker. Dana.
Pays off to have those kind of relationships. All right, Matt, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
There's no real logical explanation for us wanting to pin down the numbers. We want the real number to come out.
The governor of Puerto Rico saying he welcomes the study where Harvard University researchers found that thousands of deaths can now be blamed on Hurricane Maria. The 4,600 deaths are dramatically higher than the initial government tally of 64. The study finding many of the victims died from delayed medical care.
We had a protocol that really was subpar, and we recognize it. And now towards the future, we want to make sure that it is effective and that it's not only a good one, but that it can actually be a model for other jurisdictions as well.
Last year's storm also wreaked havoc with Puerto Rico's infrastructure knocking out power across the island. And the FCC just approved more than $51 million for the ongoing hurricane recovery effort there and in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So a man back behind bars after the court says he was released early by mistake. We'll talk to the judge who reduced his sentence about the case and calls for the president to commute his sentence. Plus, Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels' lawyer are back in court. We'll be live outside the courthouse. And be sure to awaiting a White House press briefing as Vanity Fair is reporting that reality television star Kim Kardashian will meet with Jared Kushner to discuss prison reform and possibly also President Trump. This is calls for President Trump to commute the sentence of Matthew Charles escalates. We introduced you to Charles on the program yesterday. He served 21 years in prison for selling crack cocaine in 1996. But in 2016, he was released early due to an Obama administration law that reduced minimum sentences for cocaine. Now, Charles is being sent back to prison for what the government is calling an error. With me now is Kevin Sharp. He was the U.S. District Court judge who reviewed Charles's case in 2010 and ruled to reduce his sentence. Thank you for being with us today. We have a lot to get to. Let's start with the Matthew Charles case. And as it was presented to you at the time, you thought that he warranted this ability to have his sentence reduced and to be able to walk free.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, that's absolutely right. The case had started actually, about the time I'm getting out of law school. But when I take the bench in 2011, he had filed a motion to have his sentence reduced, and no one had acted on that. And he's wrote a couple of letters, and eventually it came to my attention, and I got the government to respond to it. And so that's how he ended up in front of me. I thought, having looked at it and based on the evidence that was presented to me and the arguments, that he was entitled to the reduction. And even then, it was a close call, but you couldn't ignore what he had done with his life, and I thought that was important, and I thought it warranted the reduction, and I thought it warranted his being released.
We talked a little bit about that yesterday. You know, he had found God in prison, and he had decided to get his GED. He became a law clerk. When he was released in 2016, he then gets reunited with his family. He starts a committed relationship with a woman that is his girlfriend now. He started attending a church regularly. He got employment, shelter, and a vehicle, which seems to me the model for what we would hope for prisoners who have a chance to get out of prison. But the government is saying that he should have been classified as a career offender. And had you been given that information at the time, would you have been even allowed to reduce his sentence?
No, I don't think I would have. And it's interesting. I thought, based on the papers as they were presented to me, it was unclear as to whether he was sentenced as a career criminal. And I spent a lot of time going back through the sentencing record at the time and didn't think that that's what the judge had done, that the judge had sentenced him instead under the crack cocaine guidelines. And if that's the case, then he was entitled to the reduction. And you're absolutely right. I mean, this man had done exactly what we hope people will do, and use their time incarcerated to become a productive citizen, and he did just that. And I thought that warranted some serious consideration for his release.
So unfortunately for him, he is back in prison now, and he's supposed to serve another 10 years. There are increasingly loud calls for President Trump to commute the sentence or even pardon him. Do you think that's warranted?
I think absolutely, and that is his only chance now. I think that's exactly what you should do. This man has done what we asked of him, and he ought to be an example to others. We sentence people. Part of the guidelines say, fashion a sentence that is sufficient but not more harsh than necessary to comply with these factors that are outlined in the code. And one of those is to deter others from committing these crimes. Well, I think there also ought to be this incentive to better yourself and to turn yourself around, and that's exactly what Mr. Charles did. And I think that ought to be recognized.
Can I ask you one last question before I let you go? You made a very tough decision to leave the bench. I'm sure that when you were named to be a judge, that was probably one of your lifelong dreams. If you love the law, that's one of the things that I know that a lot of lawyers aspire to. But there was something that troubled you very much, and so you decided to leave and go back into private practice, but you've continued to fight for what you think is right. In the time remaining, I'll just give you a chance to explain that.
Well, right. I mean, people ask me now, Kevin, you realize this was a lifetime appointment? Yes, I did realize that. But I found the mandatory minimums to be so incredibly harsh. And when I sentenced 3 young men to mandatory life sentences for drug crimes that I thought deserved nowhere near that kind of punishment. I mean, one of these young men was arrested at 23 years old and will spend the rest of his life in prison. That was just wrong. And I said it from the bench that day. And I continue to say it. I don't want to be a part of this. That's not justice. And that's not what I thought the president appointed me to do. We're judges. We should be able to use our discretion, not told how to sentence individuals. And you're really not even sentencing individuals. You're sentencing a class of crime, and I don't get to look at the individual. And I thought that was wrong. I've stepped down and I've used my time to speak out against mandatory minimums and actually work with the lawyers who are trying to help Chris Young, is the young man's name that I had to sentence to life, help him in his appeals, and hopefully we can get some justice for Chris and his co-defendants.
I don't know if you follow the movement in Congress and even at the White House, this desire to try to do something with prison reform, something comprehensive if they can, or there's the First Step Act that was voted on last week in the House and now goes over to the Senate. Do you think that sort of legal remedy would help people like yourself when you're in a position as a judge to use your own discernment rather than mandatory minimums who put people away. In fact, Kim Kardashian apparently wants to talk about Alice Johnson. She's from Texas. She's a great grandmother who was put in prison for life.
Right.
After a series of terrible consequences of things that happened to her. I'm not saying she didn't do the original crime, but it does seem like the punishment doesn't fit the crime.
Right, and that's where you're taking the discretion out of the hands of the judges, and that's what you hired us to do. It doesn't mean there's not discretion. It's just that the discretion has been shifted over to the prosecutor, and that's not where it should be. The prosecutor has a role to fill in this process, and they've given some of what it should be the judge's discretion over to the prosecutor. But back to the criminal justice reform that's kind of going through Congress right now. It does some things to help, but mostly to help the recidivism and getting people back out after they've served their time. But it doesn't address the mandatory minimum issue, and unless Congress has the will to really address that. And I get that you don't get elected and reelected by looking like you're soft on crime, but this is about creating a safer society and one that just doesn't incarcerate people.
Well, and this could be the
brings
moment.
them back.
This could be the moment. We had Kevin Ring on yesterday. He's with a group called Families Against Mandatory Minimums. So the word is getting out. And Kevin Sharp, we really thanks for you being here.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Fox News Alert, new court action in the case of Michael Cohen, the president's personal attorney who admitted paying Stormy Daniels. The judge overseeing the case told Daniels' lawyer Michael Avenatti to end the publicity tour. Laura Ingle is live in New York City. Laura.
Hey, Dana. Yeah, a lot went on inside federal court today. And really the headline beyond the Michael Avenatti part of it is that the federal judge overseeing this case told all parties involved that they need to pick up the pace. They need to get through all of the documents that were seized out of Michael Cohen's home and office back in April. She wants to move this case along, and she needs everybody to start really going through all of this at a much faster speed. Judge